Margaret Hayes clutched her worn leather portfolio against her chest as she stepped off the elevator on the 32nd floor. At 24, she still felt like she was playing dress-up in her navy blazer and modest heels borrowed from her older sister who worked at the department store downtown. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in that golden glow that made even the most ordinary moments feel somehow significant. She paused at the directory, squinting at the small print. Conference Room B. Conference Room B. Her finger traced down the list until she found it. Down the hall, third door on the right. She took a deep breath. The kind her grandmother used to tell her to take before walking into church on Sunday mornings. Stand tall. Dear heart, Grandma Rose would whisper, you belong wherever kindness is needed. Margaret had been working as an intern at Harrison and Associates for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of filing, copying, and trying not to spill coffee on important documents. Today was different, though. Today, Mr. Peterson from Human Resources had asked her to deliver the quarterly training materials to the management meeting. It was a small task, but it felt monumental to someone who had grown up in a house where every dollar was counted twice. She found what she believed was conference roomy and knocked gently. When no one answered, she turned the handle and stepped inside, her heart beating with the familiar rhythm of someone who had learned early in life that confidence was something you wore like a coat even when it didn't quite fit. The room was elegant in that understated way that spoke of real success, rather than flashy wealth. A long mahogany table stretched before her, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But what struck her most was the man standing at the head of the table. His back to her as he gazed out at the city skyline. He was tall, with dark hair that caught the morning light, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him the way good clothes fit a person who had grown comfortable with success. There was something in his posture stillness that reminded her of her father when he used to stand on their front porch at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the world wake up. Excuse me, Margaret said softly, her voice carrying that particular gentleness that comes from a childhood spent in library corners and church pews. I have the training materials you requested. The man turned, and Margaret felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. His eyes were kind, genuinely kind in a way that reminded her of her high school English teacher, Mrs. Davidson, who had seen something in a quiet girl from the wrong side of town and encouraged her to apply for college scholarships. This was James Harrison. She recognized him from the company newsletter, though the black and white photo hadn't captured the warmth in his expression or the way he seemed to really see people when he looked at them. At 43, he had built Harrison and Associates, from a small consulting firm into something that mattered. But success hadn't harmed him the way it did some people. I think there might be some confusion, James said gently, his voice carrying the kind of patience that comes from understanding that life is full of small mix-ups and gentle redirections. This is the executive board meeting. Margaret's cheeks flushed the color of autumn leaves. She glanced round the room again and noticed details she had missed in her nervousness: the stack of Financy, our reports, the presentation equipment, the subtle formality that marked this as a place where important decisions were made. Oh my goodness, she whispered, clutching her portfolio tighter. I am so sorry. I was looking for the management training meeting. I must have. She trailed off, feeling foolish in the way that takes you right back to being 12 years old and raising your hand to answer a question you got completely wrong. But James smiled, not the polished smile of a CEO trying to manage an awkward situation, but the real smile of someone who found genuine warmth in life's unexpected moments. Please, don't apologize. These things happen more often than you'd think. Asterisk, there was something about the way he said it that made Margaret pause. He wasn't dismissing her or rushing her toward the door. He was present in the moment, the way her grandfather used to be when she would accidentally interrupt his evening reading with some childhood crisis that felt world-ending at the time. Asterisk, you're Margaret Hayes, James said, and her surprise must have shown on her face because he added, I make it a point to know everyone who works here. You're the intern who's been helping Mrs. Chen organize the client files. Asterisk, Margaret nodded, amazed that he would know such a small detail about someone so far down the company hierarchy. Yes, sir. She's been very patient with me. Asterisk, Mrs. Chen mentioned that you reorganized the entire filing system and found 3 missing contracts that we'd been searching for. James moved away from the window, and Margaret noticed he walked with the unhurried pace of someone who had learned that most things worth doing couldn't be rushed. That's impressive attention to detail. Asterisk, before Margaret could respond. The conference room door opened and several distinguished-looking men and women in expensive suits began filing in. The board members, Margaret realized with growing mortification. She had wandered into a meeting with people who probably made more money in a month than her family saw in a year. Asterisk, I should go, Margaret said quickly, backing toward the door, but her nervousness made her clumsy, and her portfolio slipped from her hands, sending training materials fluttering across the polished floor like autumn leaves in a sudden wind. Asterisk, without hesitation, James knelt down to help her gather the scattered papers. The board members, settling into their seats, watched with the quiet interest of people who had witnessed many moments but rarely saw their CEO on his hands and knees helping an intern collect spilled documents. Asterisk, thank you, Margaret whispered, as they both reached for the same paper, their hands briefly touching. The contact was gentle, accidental, but something passed between them, a recognition that neither quite understood but both felt deeply. Asterisk, James handed her the last of the papers, and as she stood, he said quietly, Margaret, would you mind staying for just a moment? I'd like to introduce you to the board. Asterisk, her eyes widened with something close to panic. Oh, Mr. Harrison, I'm just an intern, and I've already disrupted your meeting. Asterisk, you haven't disrupted anything, he said, with quiet conviction, and sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from people who see things differently. Asterisk, the next few minutes passed in a gentle blur. James introduced her as one of our most promising team members, and the board members perhaps surprised by their CEO's unusual approach, or perhaps recognizing something authentic in Margaret's quiet dignity, welcomed her with polite warmth. Asterisk, Margaret found herself sharing her observations about the filing system, her ideas for improving client communication, and her thoughts on making the office environment more welcoming for new employees. She spoke with the natural wisdom of someone who had grown up paying attention to how people treated each other, who had learned kindness from a grandmother who believed that everyone deserved to be seen and heard. Asterisk, when the impromptu introduction concluded and Margaret finally left the conference room, she felt something had changed, not just in how she saw herself, but in how she had been seen by others. Asterisk, James Harrison watched her go, and for the first time in months, he found himself thinking about something other than quarterly reports and strategic planning. He thought about the genuine warmth in Margaret's voice when she talked about helping Mrs. Chen, the careful way she listened when others spoke, and the grace with which she had handled an embarrassing situation. Asterisk, that evening, as Margaret rode the bus home to her small apartment, she replayed the morning in her mind. She thought about James Harrison's kindness, the way he had treated her mistake not as an intrusion, but as an opportunity. She thought about her grandmother's words about belonging wherever kindness is needed, and for the first time since starting her internship, she felt like maybe she did belong somewhere after all. Asterisk over the following weeks, James found reasons to visit different departments, to check on projects that brought him near Margaret's desk. He discovered that she volunteered at the literacy center on weekends, that she sent half her paycheck home to help her mother with expenses, and that she had the kind of quiet strength that comes from weathering difficulties without losing faith in the fundamental goodness of people. Margaret, for her part, began to notice James Harrison in a new light, not as the intimidating CEO from the company newsletter, but as someone who remembered the names of the cleaning staff, who always said please and thank you, and who had the rare quality of making people feel valued rather than judged. Asterisk there. Connection grew slowly, naturally, like the way friendship deepens over time. It was built on small kindnesses, shared smiles in the hallway, and the recognition that sometimes the most meaningful encounters begin with a simple mistake that leads us exactly where we need to be. Asterisk. In a world that often moved too fast and spoke too loudly, they found in each other something precious and rare, the possibility that love, when it comes, rise quietly, gently, wearing the comfortable clothes of genuine respect and authentic care. Asterisk. Sometimes the wrong door opens onto exactly the right room. Sometimes getting lost is how we find our way home.